Welcome back to Antiwar Radio, Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas, streaming live on the internet, chaosradioaustin.org and antiwar.com/radio. I'm Scott Horton, and our guest today is Clay Ramsey. He's the research director at worldpublicopinion.org, and he's the author of The Ideology of the Great Fear. He is Director of Research at the Program on International Policy Attitudes, and they have this new poll out about world public opinion on torture. It's at worldpublicopinion.org, and you can find the link in the news somewhere today on antiwar.com. Welcome to the show, Clay.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here, although I can't say I'm very pleased with what you're reporting in this PDF file, this survey that you've released. A poll of 19 nations, public attitudes in 19 nations, finds that in 14 of them, most people favor an unequivocal rule against torture. And I guess that's the good news, really. But then the bad news is what exactly?
Well, if you want to focus on the bad news for a while...
Yeah, let's talk about the bad news.
We have, on average, 35% across the 19 countries who say either that they think an exception should be made to occasionally torture a supposed terrorist in a case where you think you're going to save innocent lives, and then a very small 9% on average who say that torture should be permitted to governments more broadly than that.
Mm-hmm. And then from the point of view of an American, the bad news to me is that we actually, in this country, barely make the cut at 53% opposing torture in all circumstances, right?
Well, that's true. The U.S. is a little below the average of the 19 countries in this regard, and there has been a drop in support for an unequivocal norm against torture. We asked this question in 2006, and at that time, only 36% said that some exceptions should be made in the rule against torture, and that 36% has gone up to 44%.
Really? That's funny. I guess I would have thought that the attitude would be more in favor of that kind of thing at the height of that show's 24's popularity and that kind of thing. I guess not.
Well, this has been an argument that has gone on for an increasingly long period, and also perhaps it has gotten politicized. Certainly, 65% of Democrats in our poll favor an unequivocal ban. So do 56% of independents, but only 38% of Republicans do. Mm-hmm. And I think this is perhaps a regrettable effect of the issue having been waved around as a kind of political insignia.
Right, yeah. Well, I think that's probably right. It has gotten all partisan politics with candidates accusing each other of being soft on terrorists and those kinds of things. Yeah. Also, when you said that, I think you said average across the 19 countries, it was 10% generally think that torture should generally be allowed. If their government wants to torture somebody, that ought to be okay. And America's ahead of the curve on that one at 13%, huh?
Well, just a trifle, yes. With these really small amounts, once you get to 3% and below in these differences, you shouldn't put a great deal of stock on them. Mm-hmm. But the rise that I spoke of, that's a real measure. That's reflecting a real shift.
Yeah. Now, tell me about this saving innocent lives exception. How exactly is that phrased in the question? Because I don't know a whole lot about opinion polls, but I know that how the question is put to the person doing the answering is all important to what kind of answer you get out of them.
That's true, and what we wanted to do was make people think through the most difficult choices about this. So we weren't looking for an easy assent to an existing norm on torture. And so we gave people two arguments and asked them, which position's closer to yours? The first argument went, terrorists pose such an extreme threat that governments should now be allowed to use some degree of torture if it may gain information that saves innocent lives. That's a kind of rhetoric that you've heard before. Okay, the other argument went, clear rules against torture should be maintained because any use of torture is immoral and will weaken international human rights standards against torture. So they then had to choose between those two arguments. Now, those who said, well, sometimes there is an exception, got the next question, which was, what about cases that have nothing to do with terrorism? Do you think that there should be rules prohibiting torture in all other cases, or that in general governments should be allowed to use torture to try to get information? So after people have gone through both of these questions, if they're saying that governments should be more widely permitted to get information, then they've had to go through some thinking on the issue before they arrive at that. And so that's how you get down to that 13%, says that. I want to point out that's an extremely small minority. We can be shocked that there are, people who disagree with us on lots of different things. But the most important thing in assessing a public is where's the center of gravity of the majority. That center of gravity is in the United States, quite definitely in favor of an unequivocal ban on torture, no matter what the possible short-term advantages that may appear.
Yeah. Well, and center of gravity is deliberately vague because we are talking about trying to measure quality with numbers here, and it doesn't always work that way. But 53%, as you said, don't put too much stock in a 3%. It sounds like basically a half and half kind of proposition here in this country.
Well, you could look on it that way.
I'm a half-empty kind of guy, man.
Okay. There certainly is cause for alarm with this poll, and I think more people that we have been showing it to have read it that way than have read it the other way.
Well, I'm looking at the graphic here, and you have the line graph, and again, that's at worldpublicopinion.org here. And hey, Mexico puts America to shame. Spain and France and Great Britain and the Palestinians, which, what experience do they have with torture? The Chinese put us to shame here in this country. 66% opposed to unequivocal bans.
And many of those high numbers actually represent increases from when we have done this earlier, in 2006. In Mexico, it's gone up from 50% then to 73% now. In China, it's gone up from 49% to 66%. In Russia, it's gone up 43% to 49%. In Britain, it's gone up 10 points. It was already high, 72% to 82%. So there are some signs of the norm also strengthening in many parts of the world.
Yeah. I mean, that's really great to see, actually, especially in some of these third world countries where they don't have any sort of tradition of habeas corpus and trial by juries and those kinds of things. I mean, this actually does, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of a little personal rant here. This does cut to the very core of the American tradition here, and I know there has been torture in our history, but enshrined in our Constitution are at least two provisions which are attempts to ban it, and that is the prohibition against forced self-incrimination and against cruel and unusual punishment. This is not the American way to torture people.
Well, there's been a lot of political stress around the issue, and the administration has made it clear that it's willing to take a lot of serious costs, political costs even domestically at home, to cling to their view about this. And so then if you are a supporter of the administration on entirely other grounds, you may feel some pull to stand with them on this. I think that's very much, a piece of these numbers rather than people coming home at night from work and saying, I should reevaluate torture.
Yeah, I think you're right, especially when a lot of people on the right are bashing McCain for not being pro-torture enough, then that's what's wrong with the guy. And that really is, I guess, helps solidify the idea that that's the definition of what it means to be true to the Republican Party and so forth. I'm used to this kind of thing, but it still disappoints me when I see the way you phrased it in your report, modest majorities or pluralities in favor of outright bans on torture. Azerbaijan, Egypt, United States, Russia, and Iran. I mean, where's Sudan in here? I guess they weren't on your list, huh?
It's hard to pull in Sudan.
Yeah, I guess so.